The most powerful quirk in all of existence is gone forever. That's right, in Deku's final fight against All For One and Shigaraki has resulted in One For All being erased from existence. This was the moment the entire story has been building towards, finally ending the 100-year battle between good and evil. This century-long fight against All For One started with one man, his twin brother Yoichi. These siblings were a product of a sex worker who didn't know she was pregnant. In the womb, this man, All For One, was already so selfish. He sapped away all of her nutrients, not only killing her in childbirth, but coming out as a big-ass baby and leaving Yoichi as a literal twig, as he'd also taken the nutrients from him as well. But that's not all. Along with his mother's nutrients, All For One also stole her quirk. You see, this was in an era where meta abilities were completely unknown, making her and him the world's first quirk users. With baby All For One and Yoichi left on the riverbank for fate to deal with them, an incoming flood swept them away, saving the twins from being eaten by rats. They stuck together with All For One desperately holding on to Yoichi, something he grew to view as heartwarming. It made him feel like his brother was looking out for him, protecting him. However, that couldn't be further from the truth. The only reason All For One even held on to his brother was because he believed he owned him. Yoichi wasn't family, he was a thing. Furthermore, he even named his brother using the characters for one, as it was the first thing All For One was entitled to owning. Remember during the entire fight with Shigaraki and Deku in the war, he was saying that his little brother was his. He felt like he was entitled to everything. Thus, once the luminescent baby was born and the meta ability pandemic kicked off, All For One went on a rampage. He would kill as many innocent lives as possible, stealing their quirks to add to his growing collection. Yoichi, however, hated this. He tried to stop his brother, but he had no chance. All For One was superior in every way. I mean, this is the equivalent to Deku before he even worked out going against All Might. Like, it was completely impossible. Also, the mental differences between the two would also be highlighted later, when All For One found Yoichi teaching himself to read with comic books. This love for comics eventually saw the brothers actually begin to bond for the first time. However, Yoichi was met with a harsh taste of reality, because he found out who his brother truly was, when he told him he wanted to one day grow up to be like Captain Hero. All For One, on the other hand, desired a life as the villain. He wanted to be the Demon Lord, already making it very clear the route their story was going down. And it all changed when All For One returned home glowing. Yoichi was horrified at the prospect that his brother had killed the now grown luminescent baby and took his quirk. This was his first step to becoming the Demon Lord. He couldn't understand why the baby had amassed 10 million supporters, considering he wasn't even the first quirk user. By the way, this whole idea still exists in the present day, as people didn't know that All For One was the first user of quirks. People still believe that it was the baby, but All For One and his brother came before them, and even 2 weeks prior to the baby's birth, there were 50 Indian babies born with quirks. Thus, All For One told Yoichi about the comic they loved. They said One For All and All For One. Whilst the hero saved the day and hid away in secret, the Demon Lord ruled with fear and embraced his power. That was the world All For One dreamed of. He wanted to use all of the quirks he stole to achieve his own selfish goal. Whilst Yoichi believed that quirks should be used equally to restore balance to the world. This was where the war with All For One began. He went around creating a false version of Yoichi's sense of order by removing the quirks of those who didn't want them. As for some, they were actually viewed as a curse, rather than a blessing. Whilst at face value this seemed like it was helping the world, Yoichi knew the true, sinister reason behind his brother's actions. He was helpless to do anything though, as All For One imprisoned his younger brother for being in the way, and for being weak and quirkless. As time passed, he would frequently visit Yoichi, explaining every time he succeeded, showing that despite wanting to be in the darkness ruling, his superiority complex demanded that he had someone to brag to and show his supremacy. In spite of this, he had only read 3 volumes, meaning that he didn't know how the story ended, and how the villain always loses. That's right, All For One wasn't aware of the ultimate power, the power of plot armor. Suddenly, All For One's tone changed, as he claimed life doesn't work like comics. Thus, he forced a quirk onto his younger brother, this quirk being Stockpile. Unbeknownst to either of them though, Yoichi actually did have a quirk of his own. It was just a quirk so useless that there was never a chance for it to make itself known. It was a quirk called Bestowal, a quirk that allows one to pass their quirk to others. This, combined with the Stockpile quirk forced onto him by his brother, laid the foundation for a quirk that would change history forever. It was the birth of One For All, and it was time to fight back. Let's go! During a raid on All For One's base, Yoichi was saved by two vigilantes, Kudo and Bruce. Due to his close connection to the tyrannical demon lord, they planned to kill Yoichi. Remember that we're told later in the story, this was the darkest time on Earth, as All For One ruled with an iron fist with no one capable of stopping him. But instead of killing Yoichi, Kudo had a change of heart, reaching out a hand and saving him instead. It was the first time someone held his hand in order to protect. Realizing the life of his brother was finally coming to an end, Yoichi was overcome with sadness, knowing All For One's quirk could have brought so much peace to the world. Despite One For All already existing as a quirk, this moment really was the start of the cultivation that would eventually take down evil. Nonetheless, 2 months later, All For One tracked his brother down, and using a spatial distortion quirk he had stolen, he killed him, because if he couldn't have him, no one can. However, the battle had only just begun, as specks of Yoichi's blood made contact with Kudo, and so was the first time the One For All quirk was passed down. Kudo was not only one of the most important users in the battle against All For One, but his quirk would eventually become the most powerful. At this point, All For One's powers were reaching their peak, with it marking the start of the harshest era of meta abilities, as he was left completely unchecked. Kudo's body just never felt the same again though, now that he had One For All flowing through his veins. After learning it was due to him having 2 quirk factors, Gear Shift and One For All, Kudo realized that it was the remnants of Yoichi's will living on inside him. Thus he vowed to protect it with his life and nurture it. After this, he and Bruce spent some time together figuring out more about One For All. They learned the secret to passing it on, which was through DNA. Nonetheless, they wouldn't really have time to test out all of these intricacies, because All For One was tracking Kudo down to enact his revenge for making him kill his brother. Bro, need I remind you that this is all your fault?
Here I come. Oh, here I come.
He slaughtered the entire resistance that Kudo built so he could forcefully take back his brother's quirk for himself. Unfortunately, Kudo was too weak. Even with One For All, he stood no chance against the prime demon lord. He tried his best to fight back with his quirk, Gear Shift, which allowed him to alter the speed of small objects while ignoring the laws of inertia. All For One labeled him and his quirk a lousy fly, not able to understand why his brother would choose him. Now, generations later, this quirk, like many of these One For All users' quirks, leveled up by the time it reached Deku. It became one of the most busted quirks in his entire arsenal. He could switch between different levels of speeds by activating a gear, low gear, second gear, third gear, and top gear. Yep, my guy is actually Luffy. However, these powers were activated with a cost. In fact, it was only to be used as a last resort, as after 5 minutes the strain it would put on Deku's body would be far too much. There's one more ability that can be used with Gear Shift as well, and that is Transmission, which can add velocity and speed to everything it touches, including Deku himself, over and over again, stacking a number of times. The quirk isn't actually setting a new speed for the touched object though, rather it's exponentially increasing its velocity. This means that Deku can actually make himself faster than the speed of light. Obviously this would destroy his body, but even momentarily he could have destroyed the planet thanks to Gear Shift. Nonetheless, the best Kudo could do was send a bullet towards All For One, but it was stopped with zero effort at all. Thus, Kudo was caught and fatally wounded in the process as the Demon Lord cried knowing his brother was gone for good, choking the life out of Kudo. Because of everything the second user had done to ruin All For One's life, he grew to despise the Kudo, going out of his way to kill his entire family, as well as any woman he was close to, ensuring his entire bloodline did not live to see another day. I mean, look at how he reacts to Bakugo simply because he looks like Kudo. Life finds a way, and despite All For One's best efforts, Kudo's ambitions lived on through Katsuki Bakugo. However, the One For All quirk had since been passed on to Bruce, and his quirk before this transferal was Far Jin. This super overpowered quirk stores kinetic energy via repeated actions, which when released gives the individual an explosive burst of speed and power. For example, Deku used it to charge up by doing repeated squats. What's more, this kinetic energy doesn't all have to be used at once. If you've built up a lot of it but only need a small portion, you can choose to use a fraction of the stored up power. Deku took this to the next level though, as he applied this boost to other quirks within One For All. Deku could create a Fox version of 100% instant one for all, mimicking All Might without actually suffering the side effects. Bro actually moved faster than a bullet thanks to foraging against Lady Nagant. To add on to this, during his 5 minutes in gear shift, Deku could travel at such high speeds that, when combined with his foraging quirk, lets him do a quintuple Detroit smash at 120%, which breaks the laws of physics according to chapter 369. None of that would have been possible though without Bruce first passing the quirk on once more, before All For One inevitably tracked him down, killing him, which... yeah, there's gonna be a theme in this video if you couldn't already tell. The person he passed it on to was Hikage Shinomori. Seeing how the two users before him were helpless against All For One, he knew he had no chance, and so he took a different approach to fighting him. Shinomori played the long game. He hid away somewhere All For One wouldn't find him, so he could spend time cultivating the quirk and making it stronger for future users. And he did this for 18 years. You may be wondering, how did he know that battling All For One was a dangerous task that he couldn't achieve? Well, this was due to his quirk, Danger Sense. It does exactly what you'd expect. The quirk gives the user some sort of spidey sense, allowing them to detect any and all kinds of danger around them, meaning that he knows when and how to react accordingly. And as mentioned by Deku, this is in the form of a sharp pain sensation in the head. Shinomori choosing to hide away like this is what caused One For All to become as broken as it did, as he accelerated the quirk's core by cultivating it for so long. This allowed all the different users' genetic quirk factors inside to one day be unleashed, which, as we know, Deku went on to accomplish. Out of all the One For All users, Hikage's death was the most peaceful. However, it did expose a harsh and deadly truth behind the quirk. Those who already had a quirk upon acquiring One For All wouldn't be able to handle it, thus their lifespan would be greatly shortened, which is because the body can't handle multiple quirks at the same time. This comes down to the quirk singularity theory too. I mean, quirks in Deku's generation are usually too much for them if they're too powerful. Look at Darby, this guy's quirk turned him into fried chicken, so imagine multiple quirks of that same level in one body. This is the reason All For One was so desperate to get his hands on a vessel, so he could swap into a new, healthy body and ditch his dying one. Nonetheless, the fourth user died at 40 years old, as his body began to deteriorate due to rapid aging. But because he could sense that his body was nearing its end, he ensured to pass on the One For All quirk to Daigoro Banjo before dying. By this point, the world had changed greatly since the war against All For One began. Vigilantes had begun to fizzle out, with pro-heroes becoming more and more common. One of which was Banjo, aka Lariat, where he used his black whip quirk like Spider-Man to face danger using black tendrils to fight. Well, I guess that kind of makes him more like Venom than Spider-Man, but you get the idea. This quirk is powered specifically by anger, and out of all the extra quirks that Deku possesses later, this is the one he relies on most. For example, he uses it to capture escapees from Tartarus that included the likes of Muscular, whose brute strength was around the same level as All Might. Well, present All Might, not Prime All Might, of course. Deku also swings around and changes directions mid-air thanks to Black Whip, so when combined with Float specifically, his mid-air combat is extraordinary. In the war against the awakened Shigaraki, he had better air control than Endeavor, and was the only one who could keep him off the ground. And remember earlier in the series when Deku was told that if he used One For All at 100%, he could lose the use of his arms? Well, thanks to Black Whip, the recoil is nowhere near as bad as before. Deku goes even further, as when his body couldn't move in the final fight, he used Black Whip to reinforce his entire body from the inside to keep moving. And the reason Deku manifested this quirk to begin with was due to his desire to capture Nato. Nevertheless, during Banjo's hero responsibilities, he met En Tayutai. But he wasn't the only person he bumped into, as eventually All For One tracked him down as well. This resulted in Banjo's tragic demise, following All For One's failed attempt to take One For All. However, not before he passed it on to En, who would inevitably become the 6th user of the quirk in its history. After receiving the quirk, he escaped from All For One as Banjo was killed, thanks to his quirk smokescreen. This, as you can imagine, gives its user a chance to entirely conceal themselves in a cloud of smoke, making it perfect for escaping losing situations, or as Deku often used it, for making surprise attacks. Furthermore, Deku even used it to blind Nagant, despite En telling him to use it to escape, highlighting how much more diverse Deku is with quirks. That being said, En wasn't too happy with how Deku was treating his quirk, claiming he overused it and took the other one-for-all quirks for granted. But Deku's appreciation for this quirk is what lets it shine brighter than it ever did before. En didn't even think his own quirk was useful, but Deku proved him wrong with a crucial attack that was only possible because of Smokescreen. Nonetheless, after escaping All For One, En would meet fellow pro hero Nana Shimura, which is handy, as by the time All For One had found En again, it was time for him to pop his clogs, as he tried fighting off the Demon Lord, but it was a futile effort in the end, as Pro got cut in half and left for dead. Not before En strategically passed on some hair to Nana, who became the 7th and one of the most important one-for-all users. Her story starts before this though, as with her quirk Float, Nana worked as a pro hero as a close friend of Gran Torino's during a time where villainy and chaos ruled the world. This resulted in the death of her parents, leaving her all alone. However, after being given one for all by En, she had a strange dream. It was a cloudy, dark dream where the previous one for all users told her it's not time yet. She soon went from her first encounter with the past users to her first encounter with the next one though, as she stumbled upon a boy holding a pipe to a group of thugs all alone. That boy was Toshinori Yagi. This was way before his time as All Might, however, as the young boy had to beg Nana to take him on as a pupil. That being said, she soon realizes that he's quirkless and instantly rejects him. But her perspective soon changes when she learns that him and her aren't that different. Like Nana, Yagi's family was killed. In spite of this, he does not seek revenge. He seeks to build a world where those who stop these evil crimes come out on top. He aims to end the cycle of villainy and create peace once and for all, aiming to become a symbol of peace. Hearing such words from a young and quirkless boy shocked Nana, as many might explain that it was his responsibility to stand up strong and put up a grand display of power, because otherwise, being quirkless, he had no other role to fulfill in the world. Thus, Nana began to reconsider her decision to reject him as a pupil, and instead gifted him the one-for-all quirk. This is where All Might's sense of justice was taken to the next level and fully realized, as he adopted his master's belief that a true hero must always smile. Nana met her end in an amazing final fight against All For One, saving Toshinori and telling him it's now his turn. She fully believed that he would be the one to stop this monster. So, soon after her death, Gran Torino began training Yagi intensely as he promised Nana. All Might was a natural at wielding the quirk, mastering it almost instantly with barely any tutelage from Nana or anyone else. As he got older, the quirk would also morph the average sized boy into the big buff dude we see in the series. And he also had the same effect on the cultivation of One For All's power, the same way that Hikage did when he hid away. But even more so, since he wasn't just hiding away and training, he was in combat with villains for decades, so the power of One For All grew tremendously. But we have to rewind a little bit before we get there. Gran Torino said to Deku that he could actually use 100% straight away. To put this into comparison, Izuku Midoriya could barely use 5% to begin with, and 100% broke his body completely. And this was after training, unlike All Might, who was blessed with incredible genetics, meaning that for him it was free reign from the start. And One For All was also boosted even more by his powerful mental strength. He had a desire to make the world a better place, and so that attitude allowed him to go plus ultra. Toshi casually got into UA, was immediately the top student, and was basically the perfect hero. And so, despite the overwhelming grief he was feeling from his master's death, All Might stuck to his resolve, graduating from UA and making his way towards the United States, where he would attend college in Los Angeles. During this time, he defeated villains all over California and obtained a reputation, giving him a whole generation of foreign fans, one of which being none other than Stars and Stripes, who would become the US's #1 hero. Yeah, she was an absolute beast. Too bad she got packed up real quick. She barely even lasted a few chapters.
My disappointment is immeasurable.
Anyway, Toshinori's now worldwide recognition made All Might stand out from previous One For All users. While they stayed in the shadows, hiding from All For One and cultivating their powers, All Might was front and center, making the whole world know who he is. So, upon returning to Japan, All Might wasted absolutely no time. His power was on a different caliber. I mean, one of his punches could not only defeat a villain, but subsequently change the weather. So he never had to worry. He knew with full confidence that he he was kicking anyone's ass. So clearly it took no time at all for All Might to become not only the most powerful hero, but Japan's #1 hero. In his prime, this dude casually worked for 72 hours straight, using super hearing from Tokyo all the way to Osaka to learn about another crime. It didn't matter where the villain was, All Might could instantly detect them. And to make things even better, it was never done out of a need for power, gain, or any selfish motive. He was truly the complete opposite of All for One. Like Stain says himself, All Might was a true hero, someone who worked solely in the service of others. In fact, All Might's efforts were so effective, crime rates in Japan went down exponentially. The underworld that All for One had created was crumbling purely due to All Might's presence, meaning that his path of becoming the symbol of peace was the correct one. All Might would eventually take on a sidekick too, Sir Night Eye, who had the ability to see into the future, and his busted quirk would become a lot more potent after All Might's first duel against All for One. In this fight, it was the closest any user had gotten to ending the Demon King's reign. He suffered major injuries to the point where, upon recovery, he looked completely alien. I mean, look at this guy, he looks like a thumb. Ew! However, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. All Might had also received major injuries to not only his stomach, but his entire respiratory system. It was so bad that he could no longer even eat anymore, which causes the shriveled up All Might we see later. Whilst recovering in the hospital, Night Eye begged his friend to stop being a hero, because he would die at the hands of a terrifying villain in a brutal way. Obviously, we now know that this was against All for One during the final war, but Bakugo was able to defy fate and save him. But All Might never cared about what Night Eye said, because he knew that he had to keep standing as the symbol of peace. Although at this point he could only maintain his muscle form for 3 hours, and yet through all of this, he still continued to be the best hero. However, he couldn't be at his best. The more time he spent in his hero form, the less time he had at being the symbol of peace. And Toshinori knew that he needed to find a successor, and that's when Principal Nezu recommended Togata to be the next user, which is why he applied to be a teacher at UA, hoping for someone to inherit his power before he eventually died out in the public eye. Because if All Might faltered in the face of adversity, the entire world would lose hope. However, this whole plan was cut short as a young and fragile boy named Izuku Midoriya came into the scene. All Might was becoming a lot more cynical after his battle with All for One, and after saving Izuku from the Sludge villain, told him he could never become a hero if he was quirkless, which is exactly what Nana told him in the past. Despite this, after Deku saw his childhood friend Katsuki Bakugo in danger from the sludge villain that had escaped, he ran towards danger with no way of winning. His legs just moved on their own. Izuku's instincts were already heroic, even when he had zero power at all. No other hero could move, including Toshinori, who had exceeded his limits earlier in the day, but thanks to Izuku, he realized that heroes should not even care about their limits, and should only care about saving others no matter the cost. That was the dream he told his teacher Nana long ago. All Might saw himself within Deku, and was also inspired by the young boy, so he knew this was who had to be a successor. No matter how weak and frail, he was the perfect candidate. So he began to train Midoriya to hold the quirk effectively. And despite now only holding the embers of One for All Might continued to be an absolute badass, fighting off the Nomu at the USJ, where he punched the thing so hard and quickly that he nullified the beast's shock absorption. To put into perspective how broken he was in his prime, All Might says that it took him 300 punches to stop the Nomu, whereas when he was at his strongest, it would have taken 5. And he went on to defeat All for One again as everyone watched on, still believing in him even after his true form was exposed. It was here where he used up the remaining embers he had left, but instead of it being a moment of defeat, All Might turned it into a victory, rallying people under what he stood for, telling them it was their turn. While this was mainly for Deku, it also encouraged the future generation of heroes to work even harder, as they had to fill the shoes that was left behind by him. All Might truly stood as the symbol of peace. And even after retiring, Toshinori continued to be a teacher at UA, teaching a lot of the students how to fully utilize the power of their quirks. And then he went even further in the future, as he was an integral part in the final battle against All For One. You may be wondering how. I mean, he's basically a skeleton at this point. Well, it was because he had the All Might mecha suit. That's right, this man went from Superman to Iron Man. It comprised of several scale-like robotic pieces that could be detached and applied, being connected to the Hercules, All Might's car. Yeah, a very badass name. All of Toshinori's savings went into creating this suit, designed by Melissa Shield, allowing All Might to use tools, weapons, and gadgets to give him a chance against the Demon King, coming to its forefront with his sheet-style smash ultimate move. Whilst the suit was destroyed by All For One, All Might did buy enough time for Bakugo to recover and take out the original All For One body once and for all. All Might now leaves his legacy of the next generation, defying fate as he's still alive, so he'll likely live the rest of his life in peace. But the same can't be said for his pupil, the final wielder of One For All, Izuku Midoriya, because now he's just cooking burgers for people in McDonald's.
I hate you.
Okay, but in all seriousness, you guys should already know his story because, well, he's the main character. But allow me to recap it anyway. Deku got his power from All Might and he became the strongest hero ever. Deku from the get-go, as we mentioned, was the complete opposite of All Might in terms of physicality, because he had a hard time mastering 100% of One For All. But over time, he utilized different increments to grow his strength. But there was something different that made Deku on a whole other level. He had access to the vestiges of One For All, being able to communicate with them directly, eventually granting him access to all of their quirks. That's right, Deku didn't have 1, or 2, or 3, or even 4 quirks. He had 6. Yeah, he was just built different, with 8 senseis and a versatile moveset which makes him the toughest opponent All For One ever went up against. But Deku wasn't defined by this power, because saying that he earned everything because of hacks would be disingenuous, as it was his hard work and intelligence which allowed him to keep going during his darkest moments. I mean, it was Deku's courage and willingness to help others which made All Might choose him to begin with. So he shoved his hair down his throat and the rest is history. And let's just say he made the best possible choice. Deku's ideals, despite villains trying to break down his will and make him lose hope, he never stood down. In fact, Deku's indomitable will stems from him realizing that the world isn't black and white. As with Lady Nagant, he realized that people were victimized by hero society, that corruption is everywhere on both sides. It was this realization that solidified Deku's decision to save Shigaraki during the final war. I mean, this man even gave up One For All to do this. His power was an afterthought to saving a villain, a person who had taken so much from Deku. Not to mention he was also giving up something he had longed for his entire life, a power that was given to him by his hero. And yet that didn't mean anything to the goat, because he simply just saw a little boy who needed saving, and that's all that mattered. And Deku showed that it wasn't the power that made you a hero, but your heart, the ability to value others behind you to make the world a better place. That is why he's the greatest hero of all time. And to further prove that he was destined to receive One For All, we find out that the reason All Might lived for as long as he did and didn't pass away like Hikage was because he was quirkless, an empty vessel. He and Deku were meant to take on this power. You could say it was fate. Remember that the reason Deku won in the end was because he was weak to begin with. But I ain't gonna act like he wasn't broken, because he was insane in power. Even at the beginning of his career, Deku showed insane battle prowess and adaptability, utilizing different body parts to give him a larger amount of attacks, despite knowing that they would break the bones in his body. I'm no doctor, but breaking your fingers twice, that can't be good, right?
So much pain!
But it does show his resolve. The pain must have been excruciating, as even Aizawa was blown away, wondering what was driving him, and the same thing happened again against Muscular. Deku had his arms annihilated and should not have been moving at all, but his raw determination kept not only himself going, but inspired his class to keep fighting. However, as Deku grew more and more, he learned to condense and control his power, whilst continuing to learn and master his other quirks too, which had allowed the 16-year-old kid to surpass Prime All Might. Wounded All Might threw 300 100% One For All punches in 40 seconds in the anime, equaling around 7.5 per second. In comparison, Deku was using a combination of quirks to reach 120%. And not only this, but he was throwing 5 punches at this level at the same time, which obviously requires requires a lot more force and resilience. This obviously has a higher recoil, and Deku still has to master 55% of One For All, and then at the end of the series, this man covered himself in Black Whip to puppeteer his own broken body to reach even crazier speeds, keeping up with a prime Shigaraki who was about to basically destroy not only the entire country, but possibly the whole planet. In chapter 369, Deku's quintuple Detroit Smash is 5 120% punches in a moment, making his punching pace 5 times faster than Prime All Might. I mean, this attack formed a crater under Shigaraki. However, despite losing One For All, by the end, Deku is still a monster, because he was gifted with the most technologically advanced suit in Hero Society, similar to the one All Might had made, but it's way stronger, and that guy kept up with All For One. That suit was broken. All Might was, well, a complete weakling before this suit, and after, he could copy the effect of quirks, like Red Riot for insane defensive capabilities, and then he can use a form of Black Whip and Kaminari's Lightning for unique attacks that can affect the Demon King. Even the likes of Cellophane from Zero to wind in his opponents, and the Sugar Quirk to build up even more power, leading to a copy of Deku's shoot style. All Might's suit copied every single character from Class 1A's quirks, which is just insane. And 8 years later, we can imagine that Deku's has the same and more. And Deku's suit was created thanks to the battle data All Might collected in that fight. Technology has advanced tenfold in the last 8 years, so we can only begin to imagine how overpowered this suit truly is. But we do know that it'll allow him to measure up to Bakugo and Todoroki as their rivals. And by the way, if you do want to know more about this suit, then make sure to watch our video on the final chapter. Anyway, the only reason Deku can even use this new suit that likely has countless quirks is because of his past wielding the many quirks of One For All. He truly earned this power since he's still a true hero.